On behalf of the School of Translation Studies and Training, I welcome all of you. We are joined by an eminent scholar and translator, Professor Asaduddin, Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. Now, we are going to discuss on translation scenario in today's India. Please highlight the important points on the present translation scenario in India.
The translation scenario in India is currently very optimistic, very vibrant. People in India are now very mobile, much more mobile than they had been in any epoch of our history. They are traveling from one place to another. Boys and girls from the remotest part of Northeast India are traveling to Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai to work in those places, and to make sense of the culture where they are working in, or to communicate with the people, they are taking recourse to translation day and night.
So, it means the translation as an act, it is more viable and more practical in these days, particularly in context of India, given the situation that we have come in the global world.
In the past, opportunities for translators have been limited, but those opportunities have now expanded, and we need more and more good translators. In fact, there is more demand than supply now of translators. We need translators for media, we need translators for publication houses, we need translator for business houses, we need translators for international relations. So, that is why translating has become a viable profession now. In my own university, that is Jamia Millia Islamia, we run a course of translation proficiency both at the certificate and the diploma level. And for students who are good in translation, the placement comes almost immediately. International business houses, they are opening their shops here, and for localization of their products, they need to translate manuals and methods of operating machines and so on in the local languages. So, the products from these institutions, students from these institutions, they get employment. Conferences are being held all over now, political conferences, economic conferences. And for conferences, you find if a Chinese delegation is participating in the conference or a Russian delegation is participating in the conference, they speak in their own language, and we have our translators who simultaneously translate their speeches or their remarks into English or other Indian languages. And the payment is so good that they end up earning almost $3,000 to $5,000 per day.
So, given the situation that India is a multicultural state, what is the benefits, what is the exact benefit, or what are the avenues, advantages and disadvantages that we have in the situation that we are multilingual and multicultural, because it is a quality in a sense, and it is in particular context of translation, it has some limitation in that situation as well. So, would you like to give the details of the different dimensions on this note?
As I said earlier, the very survival of our nation depends on translation. India is a multilingual country, and for exchange of ideas, for exchange of information, we need to translate all the time. If I travel from Assam to Tamil Nadu, how can I communicate with the people of that state unless I have some means through which I want to communicate? Granted, Hindi or to some extent English may act as lingua franca, but to understand the local culture, to understand that particular part of the country very well, we have to understand that language, or that language must be translated into a language that I can access. That is why the multilingualism and multiculturalism that are integral to our nation, they depend on translation. And in India, what we do, it is said that we are by instinct translators, because we might communicate in one language at home. When we go out of our home in the same apartment building, we may have to take recourse to another language to communicate with our neighbors. When we go to our workplace, we take recourse to another language, and this travel from one language to another is almost seamless. Almost unconsciously we can switch from one register to another, one language to another. You can compare it with a monolingual country nearest to our place, that is Bangladesh. If you go there, you find it's almost a monolingual country. So, all the people there are speaking the same language. But I would still say you have hinted at the challenges for a multilingual country, because if you have a government circular, if you have something that is important for everyone, how many languages can you translate in? For a monolingual country, you translate it perhaps in only one language. For Bangladesh, if you get your source in English, you translate only in Bangla, and then you can almost be certain that it will be accessible to 90 to 95% of the people. In India, you will have to get the same stuff translated into at least 20 or 25 languages. The challenges are there, but at the same time, I will say that the reward is equally exciting, because each language has its strength. Each language contains a particular kind of worldview, and when we can integrate all these worldviews, our perspectives become richer.
Yeah, fine, that is very true. But when we talk of the translating culture, the cultural conversion is quite difficult. So, what are the streamlines, how to deal with the issues pertaining to translating culture?
That is true, because what happens within India if we translate from one language to another. For example, if I am translating from Bengali into Assamese or Oriya, we find that the conceptual world or the philosophical world or the mythical world is more or less the same. We have the same system of beliefs. We are familiar with our epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. We share the same history, the economic conditions are the same. So, that is something that provides a kind of integrating mechanism. Even if we are staying at different parts of the country, we share many things. But at the same time, you were hinting at the aspect of cultural specificity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
In all cultures, there is something very specific, very rooted to that culture. But what happens when people move from one place to another? And as I said, the movement has become faster now. People from the northeast, they are traveling to all part of the country. People from the north, they are traveling to south, either for business or entertainment, traveling, tourism. And that is how the unfamiliarity gradually disappears, and there is a note of familiarity that comes in. Then that cultural specificity that earlier acted as a barrier now becomes more of a sense of discovery. We travel to another part of the country, we discover new things, and that is perhaps one of the reasons why we should travel. If it is the same culture, identical culture, why should we go to a different place?
Now, I think it is needed to speak about the institutionalization of translation in India. So, what are the processes, what are the mechanism, devices which could help us in institutionalizing translation in India?
Institutionalization of translation is still a work in progress, because translation so far or till recently has not been considered as a kind of viable profession. people practice translation on the side. They did many other things, they did translation also at the same time. But it is only now that the translation is gradually becoming a viable professional activity. So, that is how, and that is why in many institutions now courses are being introduced of translation proficiency. Sometimes you have a cluster of languages, you tell students that look here, here we will translate between these languages, Punjabi, Dogri, Kashmiri, Hindi. If you are in the south, you will say Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, and so on. So, that is how you are now producing climates for translations. Translation is being institutionalized at a higher level. Just as in your center you have translation studies, students are doing translation studies where they study methods, theory, but at the same time, and I am sure you have is as a part of a course, that the practice of translation is as much necessary as the theory of translation. In fact, as far as translation theory is concerned, all the theories that emanate in translation studies, they emanate particularly from practice. When a translator translates a book, usually you will find a translator's note is appended there, where the translator enumerates the challenges that he has faced and how he or she has overcome those challenges.
Yeah, almost every theory is outcome of the practical translation, almost. That is
absolutely
true. Yeah. So, basically now the issues in translation are of more importance, because we will have to discuss the situation in which many dimensions of translation could be understood properly. So, what are the basic parameters, what are the main issues involved in present status of translation?
The issues have remained more or less as they have been right through the ages. One important idea that we grapple with in translation is the idea of synonymy, because you are transferring a volume of text in one language to another language. You are replacing one word with another word. You are replacing a sentence with another sentence. Now, the question comes, can a word in the language A can be identical with a word in language B? As far as the literal meaning is concerned, for example, you translate good as acha, bad as bura, and so on. This is the very elementary stage. As we move higher, we find that language or languages, they not only, or the words, they not only contain meaning, but they have a cultural association around them, right? And that is how an exact synonymy does not exist. Umberto Eco is an Italian writer and semiotician and philosopher who had visited India, who pointed out that look here, even a simple word like king, which when you translate it into Hindi as Raja, so at the literal level you are being correct, but philosophically you will find in the West the king, the status of the king has a certain connotation, that he enjoys the divine right. Earlier, in the earlier periods, kings were supposed to be the representative of God on earth.
So, in this context only I was trying to get the point out of that translation is discussed in the sense of politics of translation nowadays. Earlier it was not an issue. What are the methodologies or strategies required for translating, particularly in the context of politics of translation? Would you please like to give an account?
Yes, politics of translation, which is a very fashionable term nowadays, and it has gained currency in terms of the post-colonial paradigm or post-colonial period, when translation was also used as a tool to write back to the center to confront the colonialists. Now, politics of translation operates at several levels. The first, the choice of a text. At a given period,
Yeah, for example, this is a process of decolonialization. Now this is used.
yes. So you are picking a single text to translate. That writer may have produced 100 texts. There are several hundred texts that would be existing at a certain period of time, but you are choosing that particular text. So what prompts you to choose that text? So the choice of text, politics is involved. The second, politics is also involved in how you try to translate the text. And sometimes it is said that if there is a feminist translator, he will translate the text in a certain way. If someone is an anti-feminist, he or she might have a different take on translation. Sometimes there are texts like the Slima Nasrin's Lajja, which may be communally very sensitive, right? So the translator may, there will be possibilities for the translator to insert his own ideology, his own views within the translation. So earlier the assumption was that translator is a neutral human being, but now we have gained insight from different fields and we know that ideology colors everything. The translator will have his own ideology and his ideology will color the translation of his own text. For example, Gayatri Chakravarti, when she translated Mahashweta Devi's works, she had a
particular
yes, she was a highly ideological translator. And when she packages those translations, you find that all the works of Mahashweta Devi that Gayatri Chakravarti's Spivak has translated, when they have been marketed, she has appended long prefaces or introduction to those translations, where she explains the politics behind it, how she was drawn to those texts and what are the things she wanted to highlight in those texts.
So now I go back to Walter Benjamin when he says that it is not meant for those who are aware of the original text or they are known to original language. So what do you think, is this strategy viable in these days? So it should be done for those who are not aware of the original text or original language, or they should make a comparison between the two, I mean original text and the translated one.
Traditionally, we read translations only because we can't read the original, right? Okay. So normally that is the norm. If I go to France or I go to Belgium, if something is produced to me in French, obviously I will say, do you have a bilingual version? Because I can access English and not French. So here English will stand for French for me, right? A French person will not need this translation. So this is as far as the normal consumption of translation is concerned. But what you are asking perhaps is about academic sites.
Yeah, definitely.
Academic sites. In academic
particularly
sites,
in context of literary text.
Literary text, in our translation studies department or department of culture studies, department of gender studies and so on, when we study a text academically, as scholars we should be conversant both with the original as well with the target language text. We put them side by side and we try to examine how close the target text is with the original.
This will have comparative study, I think.
This allows us to make a judgment on the quality of translation.
Okay, fine.
This allows us to make comments about the correctness of the translation. I can't make this comment unless I know the original as well as the translation.
Okay, fine. You always talked about mobility. So given this situation, the border, displacement, migration and so on and so forth. Like Salman Rushdie once wrote that I am a translated person. So in this context, if he says like because he had to migrate from India. So in these situations, how translated text or translated person is needful, how it will be relevant for us, and what is the method, how good it is for the progress of translation, and how it is important to deal with this situation, particularly in context of diaspora.
I will give you a concrete example. For example, we have various troubled spots in the world. You have Indians everywhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes perhaps an Indian is accused of a crime of accident, crime of murder and so on. But say a driver from a Punjabi village, he does not know any other language except the local lingo of Punjab, right? He will be produced in court. How the court in Saudi Arabia or Dubai or some other country it can take decision? All its decision will be dependent on the translator and interpreter.
The authenticity will be mattering.
Determined.
So
That is how translation is intimately connected to diaspora, to asylum seeker, to refugees, and to many other things, court proceedings in fact.
That's true. So, it is important issue to be discussed, particularly in context of translating legal text and in the judiciary system. Thank you indeed for highlighting this point. And before we conclude, let us talk about one important issue that we want to deal with. What is the prerequisite condition of the domain knowledge of a translator? How it is important for translator?
It is very important. Sometimes people assume that translation is very easy, but if you are translating a text on computer,
yeah.
if you are translating a text on any other subject, what is required, because you have specific terms, you have words that are specific, they have a specific meaning within that domain, they may not have that meaning outside that domain. So, translation of domain text is very challenging, and the translators must have deep knowledge of the domain.
Thank you indeed for highlighting all the issues pertaining to translation, particularly on today's topic.
Thank you for the opportunity.